Could the Invincible universe survive sin from murder drones? That is the question I will be answering today, and it's a little more complicated than it sounds. Starting off, I should probably break down what type of scenario this is to even begin with. For this, we'll be taking Sin at her peak, meaning she will have access to all the disassembly drones she had on Earth, as well as access to her full power, versus the Invincible universe during the time of the Invincible War. I'm going to be going off mainly the show for this, however I will use comic cross-scaling just to amp the characters a bit. So, essentially, Sin and her disassembly drones will be taking the place of Angstrom Levy and the Evil Mark variants. And they will be going up against, well, basically going into almost the same scenarios that we see within the show, with Sin herself being the kind of ultimate villain here, and her disassembly drones being basically the main things most of the heroes of Earth will be going up against. So, starting off, I guess I should start with Invincible scaling, then move to murder drones, and then move to how I would see the scenarios going. Invincible scaling is kind of easy. Starting off, pretty much every character that's stronger than someone like Immortal, or at least comparable to someone like Immortal or War Woman, should be at least in the moon ranges of power. This is mainly because, although Immortal is noticeably weaker than Omni-Man and arguably weaker than Season 1 Mark, he's still able to do some physical damage to him, and was strong enough to be considered a kind of threat along with the full Guardians of the Globe by Omni-Man himself. Immortal was also beating an alternate Mark in the Season 2 alternate universe scene. I know there's going to be that one guy that says Mark was actually going to win that fight because Mark says that little "I've been hit way harder before," like way harder bullshit. Yeah, to me that really just looks like Mark is trying to taunt Immortal, because right after he says this, Immortal literally just basically beats the shit out of him again. Like, Mark does nothing impressive that whole scene. Immortal is noticeably the guy that's dominating that fight. And it's not like with Omni-Man where Immortal gets one good hit in and then gets immediately, like, humbled in, like, 3 seconds, largely because Immortal basically snuck attack him. Immortal's, like, actually beating Invincible in that little scene there. It's not like he's, like, pulling dirty moves, like, going for the eyes. Like, he's beating him in a fist fight. Sure, you could argue Invincible might have won it out in the end, just maybe due to being more durable than Immortal, which he probably is due to Immortal's pretty poor durability for his AP. But, I mean, you can't really say Immortal didn't at least put up a pretty decent fight. The only reason he even died there is because Omni-Man literally snuck attacked him, chopped an arm off, and then by then it's Immortal, who's easily lost Omni-Man before, trying to fight Omni-Man with one arm that's gone. Like, it was obvious that he wasn't going to survive that. So, off that alone, Immortal and pretty much anyone that scales to him to some degree is most likely in the multi-continental to moon level ends of AP. This is even more consistent with Immortal doing fairly well against Goggleless Mark up until the very end. And yeah, that Mark was trying to drag out the fight and was probably not going at his absolute best. Immortal did still make him bleed, so that counts for something. But, I mean, Immortal is still definitely a higher tier for Earth heroes, so not a lot of people definitely just don't scale to that level of power. The other ones that kind of do would be Rex, just due to him showing kind of relativity to Immortal and how well he did against an Invincible variant. Some people are probably going to be like, well, didn't Rex do better because he actually killed the variant? He also killed himself. So, no, he really didn't do that much better. Yeah, the variant didn't kill him, but at the same time, the variant decided it would be a better idea to sit there and monologue instead of just snapping his neck, which he pretty easily could have done. So, that could just be chalked up to the variant being kind of stupid. Regardless, in the actual fight parts of both, Rex is shown to at least somewhat damage the variant's suit and keep him stunned for a bit. Immortal's shown to draw blood. They're somewhat relative when it comes to keeping an evil variant away. I would say Immortal's probably still a decent bit stronger than Rex and definitely faster, but when it comes to the like ultimate attacks, obviously Rex's self-destruct would be above Immortal, just due to the fact it was able to do what Immortal couldn't do. And that is actually kill an evil variant. The only other member of the Guardians of the Globe that I really kind of think might scale to Immortal would be Bulletproof, who I think would just be kind of under Immortal in terms of like everything. He has very similar powers, but is still probably under Immortal. Of course, he does have some hacks abilities that could allow him to get the upper hand if the two fought. As a baseline, I do still think that when it comes to like their normal power levels, he's probably just under Immortal, but probably a little bit above Rex. If we're not counting Rex's like self-destruct move. So those three would really just be the like top tiers of the main Earth heroes, not counting Invincible, Oliver, and all them, obviously. And everyone else, like Duplicate, Shrinking Ray, all them, they're not doing too hot here. I'm going to be pretty blunt about that. People that don't really scale to Immortal aren't going to do very well here. And that's largely due to just how powerful the disassembly drones can get once I get into their scaling. The only thing that they might be able to do is maybe catch the drones off guard if they're able to exploit the kind of inconsistent durability of Murder Drone's characters. But when it comes to a normal fight, I don't see any of them winning. And this goes for all the pretty much just random heroes that evil Mark variants just basically one-shotted or just embarrassed in their fights. Like the Hunk, Boss Baby, whatever that big green guy was. Yeah, they're all probably not doing too hot either. The only other Earth hero I think would probably do pretty good, and this is excluding Mark, Eve, and Oliver and all them, would be Tech Jacket. And that's, if you scale him to both the show and comic versions, he'd be pretty overpowered, at least in comparison to everyone else. And I do think he'd do fairly well. He's definitely above Immortal. But outside that, they're going to have to really rely on Mark, Eve, Oliver, Tech Jacket, and Immortal, basically. When it comes to scaling people above Immortal, you basically just use Omni-Man as a measuring stick. Current Mark is at least somewhat comparable to Anissa. Anissa should be at least somewhat comparable to Lucan, and Lucan's somewhat comparable to Omni-Man. So, at bare minimum, Mark would be approaching Omni-Man's level. This is pretty consistent, as while Bloodlusted, he was able to fight Conquest on relatively even ground. Yes, Conquest lost an arm, but so did Mark, so it's not like you could say either one was nerfed there. So, yeah, I do think Mark is at least comparable to Omni-Man. I know there's some people that don't, but regardless, I do think Blue Suit Mark is at least in the same ballpark as at least Lucan. And he's definitely in the same ballpark as Anissa. But in my personal opinion, I do think he is on par with Omni-Man currently, at least in physical strength, obviously not in skill level. So right there, you automatically have a guy who scales to one of the strongest characters in the verse outright. The highest scaling for Omni-Man would be if you take the Viltrum feat, which also works for Mark. Obviously, that's later on, but just scaling it, normally it's going to be in the small planetary all the way up to large planetary ranges. The reason for this is that Viltrum was able to take a star-level attack right through its core, so it's obviously strong on a normal planet, though the three Viltrumites that ended up destroying it, Mark and Omni-Man being two of them, had to have their timing perfectly, otherwise they would have died. They also had to hit it after it was already weakened, and they make it pretty clear that their durability doesn't scale to that level of AP. So depending on how strong you think the planet was after it got hit with an attack that's shown to be able to destroy stars, it would be in the small to large planetary ranges. Regardless, Mark would just scale to that to a lesser degree. Eve should also be in the same general ballpark as Mark, whereas characters like Oliver and Powerplex are probably closer to Immortal. I know there's going to be people thinking that Oliver definitely upscales Immortal, blah, blah, blah. There's really nothing that really says he does. Conquest was... I mean, it's not like Conquest is hitting him full force. He wasn't hitting Mark full force till later on. He likes dragging fights out. So saying he took a hit from Conquest when that hit noticeably basically took him out of the fight instantly is not a very good argument. There's also people that are going to say, well, he beat the Mauler twins. The only reason Immortal lost to the Mauler twins is because they used a nerve gun that was strong enough to even hurt Invincible, whereas Oliver just kind of broke the gun almost instantly after he was thrown to the ground and took physical damage from a Mauler twin, so it's not like he massively upscales them or anything. He only really killed them because he caught them off guard by how he was just basically murdering them instantly. Unlike Immortal, who wouldn't be bloodlusted in that fight. So I don't think he really just massively upscales Immortal or anything. He should be more durable, arguably, and probably a little bit stronger. But when it comes to like overall effectiveness, he's obviously less skilled, and I wouldn't really say he's overall a better fighter here. And Powerplex is even worse because although he does have the potential to basically one-shot disassembly drones and even hurt Sin if he takes enough hits, He has a pretty exploitable weakness. He's noticeably not that strong on his own if he isn't constantly taking damage. And even Eve was able to pretty easily beat him. The only reason Invincible didn't beat him almost instantly is because Invincible's holding back a lot. We see later on how easily he could deal with Powerplex if he wasn't. So, yeah, I don't think Powerplex is that useful here. Yes, he did kill an Invincible variant by himself, but that was likely due to the variant not knowing about his powers and him taking advantage of that. I don't think he would be able to do very well against a whole army of disassembly drones, because once one drone sees the weakness, this is ignoring that they have really good regeneration. I don't think the others are falling for it. They're probably just going to grab him and either fly him into a high atmosphere where he can't breathe, or they're just going to basically irreversibly damage him through non-blunt attacks, like just stabbing the hell out of him or just blasting him with energy. And if that doesn't work, they could always knock him unconscious, put him in a pod, and shoot him into space. So there's a lot of ways they could pretty easily kill him if they knew about his abilities. I do think he'd be fairly useful in a team, especially if other members of that team are constantly amping his energy up by hitting him to basically just boost his power. So I could see him being a pretty useful member if he was to team up with the Guardians of the Globe or something. But I don't see him being extremely useful by himself unless he's in a 1v1 against a disassembly drone, and that disassembly drone just happens to not be very bright. And as for speed, most characters in Invincible show pretty decent relativistic to FTL reaction speed as far back as Season 1, and even in the early comic book as well, as most of them are able to react to the laser weapons used by the Flaxons. However, I do think that they should get a lot higher in reaction speed. This is due to a lot of the calcs for Omnima's travel speed getting very high. There is, of course, the fact that Viltrumites canonically do kind of warp space-time to move that fast, and they do take time to build up that speed. They should still be able to react to it. Though their speed in atmosphere is canonically nerfed, this is a pretty major plot point in Season 1, and it is mentioned in the comic book as well, so they're not as, super high tiers aren't going to be as fast in atmosphere as they are in space, but they should still be able to at least register information at the same level. Maybe not react quite as fast, but still be very, very high into the FTL to MFTL levels of speed. And this goes for most characters, as most characters can kind of react to each other. The only character that's getting consistently blitzed is Cecil, who's a normal guy, and he's getting blitzed by Mark a lot, who's one of the strongest characters in the verse. So for the most part, I do think most of the characters are at least, they're not even, but I don't think the gaps are in the trillions or anything when it comes to speed. They're still in the same general ballpark of FTL to MFTL when it comes to reactions. And in atmosphere, their speeds are nerfed, but it's to a kind of weird degree. As in combat, it's not completely out of the question they could reach MFTL speeds briefly, but they can't keep those speeds up, otherwise they would ignite the atmosphere, which is kind of what Omni-Man did. So, they're pretty, most members of the Invincible universe are pretty decent when it comes to speed. Now to Sin in our army, we're going to start off with the disassembly drones. As a baseline, they should all just kind of scale to N, V, and J, who all have pretty decent showings. Starting off with durability, this is the most inconsistent thing in the entirety of murder drones. They go from taking bullets with absolutely no damage, to taking major damage from railgun, to even getting damaged by rebar and metal spikes and fans. Granted, there is an explanation for at least a couple of these instances, as a lot of the pretty poor durability showings are them being attacked by Doll, who is a absolute solver user. So you could argue the objects she's manipulating do kind of just scale to her solver, as the energy of the solver is what's moving them, and they should be hitting with a pretty insane amount of force, as you can get the solver itself all the way up to the star ranges very easily, even for Doll. So their durability is iffy. It's pretty iffy at best, but they should at least somewhat scale to their own AP, as they can endure hits from each other in fights. V and J show this pretty consistently. And the only times they're shown taking major damage in melee combat is against Sentinels, which usually basically nerf them before attacking by shutting down their systems, which should probably weaken their durability. Sentinels are also made from similar tech to them, so it makes sense that they should be able to damage them. And also against solver users who are just blatantly stronger than them, and pretty much the strongest things in the verse, as the strongest character in the verse, Sin, as well as Uzi, who's second, are solver users. So I don't think their durability is as bad as some people would probably think it is, but it's definitely not great just due to some of the inconsistencies with it. Regardless, though, what is pretty decent is their speed, as pretty much every murder drone would just scale to In, who can pilot a ship that has traveled at MFTL speeds. He would have to be able to react to this if he's actually piloting it. Sin herself is also kind of implied to be able to pilot the same ship and travel at those speeds. So pretty much everyone in the verse kind of has that reaction time. Sin's light tendrils also react to this same ship. And since all of them kind of show reaction speeds relative to each other during the final fight, they should all kind of just scale to this. And this is in atmosphere, as unlike Invincible, they don't really have an atmospheric nerf. Though you can argue Invincible should still be faster due to overall higher speed calculations for them. The atmospheric nerf does kind of make this a bit iffy on who's actually the fastest two. So for this, I'm just going to assume that they're kind of even, but it's very debatable. When it comes to attack potency, this is where I see murder drones getting downplayed like a lot. With some people arguing that even Sin herself is only around multi-continental consistently. No, her casual attacks have multi-continental level calculations. That isn't her consistent power. That's her normal casual punch. That'd be like if you took Goku's just regular punches and said that his Kamehameha is only at the same level as him punching Cell in the face or something. It's not no. The stronger attacks would be where their highest ends would be. And some people like to just point out little attacks like the smaller nulls and stuff, the explosions that they cause. On a consistent level, she's, even while weakened in another character's body that she didn't have full control of, and also, again, weakened, was able to produce a null powerful enough to, quote, half implode Copper 9. Copper 9's size is pretty unclear. Some people think it's smaller nerf due to the fall scene in Cabin Fever taking a very long amount of time. You could argue that, but the gravity itself seems to be relatively similar to Earth, and most exoplanets are pretty close to Earth in size, some of them being larger, some of them being a little bit smaller. None of them being as small as some of the calculations for that fall would make the planet seem. So depending on how you look at it, it's a pretty impressive feat, but it can range wildly. Regardless, in most cases it's in the same ballpark as the Texas Meteor feat, and Sin did this while hyper nerfed. So obviously her casual end should still be higher than this, which we see her higher ends when she destroyed Earth. The black hole she produced to do this, in most calculations, is large star level. There was a solar system calculation for it, but for whatever reason, it up and disappeared from the internet. It did exist. I saw it, but yeah, it's gone. So we'll just assume it's large star level because I guess maybe the calculation was wrong, or whoever made it didn't agree with it later on. Regardless, she's at least large star level, but there's implications that she could straight up be a universe buster. While I typically don't use that, there is still statements from herself where she essentially says she could destroy the entire universe in a couple months. So if you take her word for it, that would automatically just get her into the universal range. Regardless, the nature of the Absolute Solver itself is also kind of implied to be a basically end of the universe thing, to consume the universe. So there's also that. Regardless, though, she's usually going to find herself in the star ranges off the Earth feed. Even if you do think that that is something she could normally do, there's no reason to assume she shouldn't at least somewhat scale to that feed. Nothing in the verse implies that she is drastically under the black hole that she produced. She's even shown to be able to crush nulls, which are either black holes or singularities, which is something that is definitely well above multi-continental. So the arguments that I hear for her being that low in scaling, despite having very obvious implications of not being that drastically low, are usually just people downplaying the verse. Regardless, Sin herself would find herself in at least the star ranges of power, most likely in the large star range, because I don't really see a reason why you wouldn't scale her to that feat. Regardless, she's at least in the star ranges, dwarfed star level at least. And the murder drones would just kind of downscale off of that. Disassembly drones, though a lot weaker than her, weak enough to get one-shotted, still can fight her and kind of damage her force fields, which scale directly to her AP. So they should all kind of just be in the at least planetary ranges, most likely. You could argue they're a little bit lower than that, as again, since durability is arguably like pretty bad, just due to the inconsistencies of it. She was damaged by a pretty normal steel door, but just due to the fact that murder drones can kind of go toe to toe with weaker solver users, I don't think it's too out of the question to at least assume they aren't like trillions of times weaker than Sin or anything. So for the most part, I think most of them would find themselves in the planetary range in AP, and probably a decent bit lower in durability. Granted, not all their weapons would be that strong in AP, only their stronger stuff, like their unphysical blows and stuff like their energy cannons. Their guns arguably could scale to that, but most showings of that actually did damage, like when V was able to kind of shoot Doll in the head. Doll didn't have her force field on, so you can't really say that overpowered the force field or anything. Whereas other weapons are shown to at least kind of damage shields and damage solver like constructs and stuff. So off that, the drones are pretty powerful in their own right in comparison to the Invincible verse. But how do they actually end up doing if they replace the evil Invincible variants in Angstrom Levy? And I'm gonna be pretty blunt about this. They do pretty well. Starting off, if we were to go by every scenario, assuming everything happened the same way it normally would, I don't think Rex's team's doing very hot. Robot is probably getting hacked. Besides his main body, all of his drones are probably getting hacked by the Solver. And the Solver can do that, so that's probably not going well for them. Robot would be essentially useless by then, so he's getting murdered. Monster Girl is probably getting folded pretty quick. Even if she could take on a single disassembly drone, she's probably getting jumped by at least like 2. Bulletproof would do okay, but again, he's most consistently in the moon level. Moon level ranges of power, if you do scale him kinda to Viltrumites, just to a lesser degree, he would find himself somewhere in the lower planetary ranges. However, disassembly drones just find themselves in planetary as a baseline for AP. So though I do think Bulletproof could hurt one if he got a good hit in and they weren't like blocking or anything, I think they would be able to kill him a lot easier than he'd be able to kill them, especially when you factor in their regeneration, as well as their wider arsenals and arguably faster reaction speeds. And Rex isn't doing too hot here. The only win con he really has against disassembly drones is if he's able to get a hold of one, as his powers should be able to basically just cause them to explode. Regardless, though, I don't think he's doing too hot unless he just really goes insane and is able to get a hold of all of them before they're able to kill him. His durability is pretty bad in comparison to his AP. All it would take is a single murder drone to use a rifle on him and he'd probably die. It would be even worse if murder drones just started missile spamming or just energy blasted him, not to mention that they could overpower him in melee combat, as we've seen him get overpowered in melee pretty bad before. So I don't think Rex is getting cool sacrifice scene here. He's probably just dying. Even if Shrinking Ray arrives earlier, I mean, her powers would be something that would throw the drones off, but even if she was to get into one and affect it from the inside, they can regenerate. So her trick wouldn't really work on them, and even then, I mean, all it would take, again, is like a single good hit from a rifle, and she'd probably die, as her durability isn't much better than Rex's. And stuff doesn't go much better for the other Guardians of the Globe either. Shapesmith, I didn't even mention him in the scaling part because he's just he's cooked. I mean, what's he gonna do? He's weaker than Martian Man, who's weaker than Immortal, and even Immortal is arguably weaker than Rex when Rex is going full sacrifice mode. So, yeah, Shapesmith he's not surviving. Black Samson's also dying like almost instantly. I mean, did you really expect anything else from him? And Duplicate, yeah, all she really is a pretty decent fighter with slightly enhanced like physical strength and durability that can clone herself. And murder drones are known for basically squad wiping entire militaries and wiping out the entire human population on Earth pretty quickly, often taking on dozens of humans by themselves with like no difficulty. So yeah, Duplicate she's just a buffet for them. Immortal does a lot better than pretty much everyone else has up until this point. I do think he'd be able to at least take on a single disassembly drone by himself and do okay, but it's really just going to end up being him against multiple murder drones because his team is, quite frankly, horrible. They barely helped him against Goggleless Mark, and they're not going to help him at all here. So it's probably going to end up very much the same story it was originally for Immortal. Though I do think out of all the Earth heroes, Immortal probably puts up the best fight overall, excluding top tiers like Mark, Oliver, Eve, and all them. Now for random other encounters, the werewolf, he did survive a fight with an evil Invincible, so you could argue he could beat a single disassembly during the fight. However, again, the regen probably makes that a bit iffy. Regardless, I do think he does pretty decent. He did beat an evil Invincible, so he probably survives at least the first 1v1, even if it requires him to just run away. I don't think he's surviving the full attack, though. Tech Jacket, I do 100% think could beat a single disassembly drone in a 1v1 fight. He was able to defeat an evil Mark, who should automatically already be approaching that small planetary tier, meaning he would be at least comparable to a murder drone overall AP, at least the base ends of one. So I do think he could beat one, especially a weaker one. Now, if he was to go up against named ones like In, V, or J, that's a bit more debatable, as they are probably at least a bit above average, seeing as Sin specifically cloned them and like used them as their like main team. So I do think it's a bit more debatable if he'd be able to beat one of them in a 1v1, but he probably can beat a weaker one. I don't think he would survive getting jumped by 2, though, and I don't think he'd survive the entire war either if everyone else doesn't pull their weight. And Mark and Eve would probably have a similar counter to what they did with the evil Invincibles, but this time it'd be 2 murder drones. I think Mark does pretty well. He's a lot more durable than a murder drone most likely is, just due to the inconsistencies, and his physical power at this point would be comparable to their mid-ends. The only thing you have to worry about is their pretty insane arsenals and their speed, but even then I do think Mark has the skills to take one down, as their regeneration does have a kind of limit to what they can really endure. Well, it's not really a limit, as they will just kind of form a new body over time, but they do have a limit where their main body stops regenerating and they have to go try to form another one. He could beat one to that point. Eve was going to struggle a lot more. It's really if Eve can actually use her powers on one effectively before they just like decapitate her or something. Though if she gets her limiters off, she's probably just obliterating one, or if she just basically gets her powers to like actually affect their body, she could just basically transmute them and kill them instantly. So even Mark probably survived their first encounter. Tech Jacket also most likely does as well, but most of the other heroes are ending up the same way. Like the Hunk is probably dying the same way he did. Cecil is probably also dying. The Pentagon probably isn't withstanding murder drones attacking it if they did, so I don't think the Reanimant are doing too well against a bunch of murder drones. The main reason is that they require basically jumping an opponent as strong as the evil Mark variant. Most murder drones are a little stronger than a Mark variant, and most of the ways they kill the Mark variants are like snapping their neck or just beating them into a pulp. That isn't going to work on something with regeneration as good as a murder drone. So they're probably just going to end up getting overpowered. Just ignoring that murder drones are just as brutal and just as insane as they are. And there's arguments to be made that Sin's army could potentially be just as large as their like numbers, as Sin can clone murder drones. There's also the chance Sin could hack into their technology, as they are technically machines, and that would be really, really bad, as a whole swarm of those would be a problem for even mainline Invincible. Even though he was able to defeat a lot of them pretty easily, he still was taking noticeable damage from them, so you add them with the murder drones, that would be a pretty big problem. And then we get to the next part, and that is the arrival of Sin. Since the war would basically be over at this point, and the heroes have done a lot worse than they did in the main line, you really just have Invincible, Oliver, Eve, and Tech Jacket, and that's pretty much everyone that's still alive, versus Sin and her army. And I don't think I really have to explain how this goes down. The only way I could possibly see them beating Sin is if they're able to have Eve get close enough to transmute her as well as her entire army, and somehow she hasn't spread her influence to any machines on Earth that they didn't get. And the chances of that working are like 0. I could see them damaging Sin since she's relatively cocky in combat, but the second she starts throwing nulls, it's over. Like, it's over for them. This is ignoring that they can't really kill Sin permanently, as even if they did do the whole transmutation thing with Eve, Sin's core would still probably be intact, and her core can enter a singularity mode, and unless you can destroy a black hole, you can't really kill her. And none of them have the ability to destroy a black hole, unless you think Eve maybe could, due to the nature of her powers, which she might be able to do, but it's never been shown, so you can't really say she 100% could. So their only win con is if you just really highball Eve's powers and assume she's not going to get one shot by a black hole or something first. So, yeah, I don't think the Invincible Universe would survive an invasion from Sin. Even if the murder drones were lowballed to the lower ends of theirs, she could just swarm them with. She could just swarm the planet with insane numbers, and she herself would still be pretty overpowered in her own right. And I don't think they'd actually be able to put her down just due to her core. So even if you were to use lower ends and lowball her all the way down to a multi-continental, she's probably still gonna win just due to how impossible it is to kill her, and the fact that she can eventually just destroy the planet with a massive black hole. Lowballed or black holes would still be something no character in the verse has a resistance to. We know for a fact black holes can kill Viltrumites. Omni-Man was going to fly into one to do just that. And her overall AP for her strongest black holes, even with the lower ends, is still in the star ranges, and we know that star level attacks can one-shot Viltrumites stronger than Mark, as Omni-Man himself basically says Star Racer's gun could kill almost anything in the universe, including himself, meaning Mark and potentially even characters like Thrag and Battle Beast as well, and obviously Conquest. And obviously, if Conquest shows up after all this, if he decides to go to the planet, even after seeing all the chaos there, yeah, he's probably not leaving for obvious reasons. So, yeah, I don't think the Invincible Universe would do very well against Sin. She's just like impossible to kill, even if she's lowballed. Her scaling on their more consistent ends is she's just blatantly higher than even like characters like Thrag. And although the disassembly drones are pretty poor in durability if you use the inconsistencies, I still think they're a big enough threat to take down a lot of the heroes outside top tiers like Tech Jacket and Mark. The only way I could possibly see them as winning is if you use crossover scaling from the comics, as well as scaling to some of the higher ends for Omnipotus and all that, which would get them on pretty even playing fields with Sin. But even then, they really don't have a counter to her unkillability, so it's still probably a win for Sin, unless you think Eve can affect black holes like that. So, in short, no, the Invincible Universe does not survive an invasion from Sin.